Our workshop, and this is being live streamed, so welcome everyone who's watching from home. This is our first of 2 workshops for the budget. So we will start by calling this to order, and if anyone would like to say the civility pledge with me, feel free. We pledge to build a stronger and more prosperous community by advocating for civil engagement, respecting others and their viewpoints, and finding solutions for the betterment of the town of Bluffton. Thank you, Bridget. We have public comment that are pertaining to only agenda items. Anything? No public comment? Public comment is closed. Workshop, we're up. We're doing the 4 funds, an overview, and we start with the general fund. Good evening, Mr. Cease.
Actually, go so fast.
I just heard someone has to be done by 6:30, so we're on a. I'm leaving it.
Well, if you're trying to keep up with Larry's record, Larry would have us.
I think we can a lot. 15 minutes.
Don't ask that question.
All right, sorry.
Get my stuff out the way in case I need to make notes. All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. As you know, this is our first Town Council budget workshop for the budget year 23-24. We will have another one on Tuesday, May the 30th, which is the day after Memorial Day. So we'll be back in here and we'll go over CIP, and we'll also have the DMO here as well to talk about their next year's expenditures. So similar to what I did during the first reading of the budget, I'm going to go through some of the economic factors, our budget goals, go over the budget, and I'll go a little more detailed than I did by department and stuff. We'll go through. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to just stop me and let me know as we go through. I know we went through several of them during the first reading, so I think we got some out the way, but we can address anything else that comes up. So again, to talk about the economic factors, these are just an overview, gives you our per capita, median family, and we also added in our area median income this year so we can have that to track and keep up with as we move forward, as well as our median housing cost and unemployment rate compared for the county and the state. So went over this last time, but just to reiterate, these are some of our economic drivers. You can see how they've changed over the last year with healthcare and education going down a little bit, accommodations, food and entertainment going up about 3%, retail going down about 1.5%, professional, scientific, and management staying pretty level, and then construction actually going down close to about 3% from last year. Now just remember, these are percentages, these are not actual numbers, so if we had more jobs created and accommodations, food and entertainment, and construction stay the same, then that number is still going to go down. It doesn't necessarily mean jobs have lost, it just means it's now a lesser percentage of our overall economy. So we have not heard yet, as far as I know, about our credit rating review, but so right now we are still the same. We have excellent credit position with AA+ for Standard & Poor's and AA1 for Moody's. We are still hoping to have that by the time we do second budget reading in June and know whether we'll stay the same or whether we may get an opportunity to move higher in our credit rating. So again, the goal of the budget is to continue to deliver on the strategic plans, priorities, and our mission and vision of the town that council has established, that we review annually and that we set really every 2 years to work towards. We make sure our budget reflects that. So this budget reflects growth management, which is affordable housing, long-range planning, and also working to update some of our master plans. As you know, we've started our Buck Island Simmonsville community, and once we get that one adopted, we'll decide whether we want to move Goethe Schultz or an Old Town or where we may need to go next for our updating our plans. Also with watershed and resiliency, May River Action Plan, our regional partnerships and protection of that, and as well working to get a lot of our capital projects moving forward and trying to get them completed. So there's quite a list of them there that we're continuing to work on and will continue into 23-24. So we're going to go through an overview of the funds. As the mayor said, we're going to talk about. Instead of 4, now it's 5 because we added the special revenue fund this year, which is our hospitality and local accommodations. Because of the increase we've had in them, they've become more major funds versus just secondary funds. So before we get into the general fund, we'll do our overall consolidated budget to show you where the total budget for the year is. And you can see for fiscal year 24, it's proposed to be about just short of $78 million. Last year, the total consolidated budget was about 73, a little over. I will point out again, like I did last time, if you look in special revenue funds for fiscal year 23, there is 0 because we didn't account for those last year. And in this year, there's a little over 9 million. So even though the total consolidated budget is up about 4.5, 9 million is in special revenue. So if you take out the special revenue, we would be down about 4.5 million over where we were last year. Just wanted to point that out so that, because we're not really looking at apples to apples over fiscal year 23 and 24 because of the new funds that we're accounting for in our consolidated budget. So a few highlights. Recognizes a little bit of slowdown that we've had in construction and permits over the last year. It does recommend to keep our property tax millage the same at 38.5 mils. That includes our ad valorem and as well as our debt millage. This is pending reassessment, which is going on at the county right now. So once we get an idea of what reassessment will do, we'll come back to council to discuss how that may affect our millage rate. Again, focus on town council's priority programs, affordable housing, historic preservation, quality of life, and as well as doing community outreach and celebrations. It does work to continue to grow our pay for our employees. You know, we did our class and comp last year, which gave about an average of around 7% for all employees, and we did a 2% merit in January. So that was about a 9% in the current budget year we're in. For next year, we're looking to do a 2% cost of living, which will bump everybody's pay as well as the pay bands 2%. And that's one of the things that's new now that we did the class and comp. One of the reasons that hit was so high was because we always did merit increases. We didn't do anything to adjust our pay bands throughout the year. So this will adjust our pay band to try to keep up, as well as have 2% to adjust people within our pay bands. So we'll recognize the growth, and then we'll also recognize performance. So that's a little something different for this year, but it'll be for the vast majority of our employees a 4% increase. So when you add that with about the 9% that we averaged last year, again, it's about 13% over these 2 fiscal years, trying to keep up with the growth of cost of living as well as inflation. It also works to invest in our public infrastructure. As you know, we've got a lot of projects going on. I think they were down here getting started on Bridge Street for sewer. So again, public sewer, streetscapes, parks, and as well as doing projects throughout all of our communities. So we've got Phase 5 sewer that's been awarded. We've got street lights, sidewalks on Buckeye and Simmonsville. We've got the barn project out on New Riverside. So we're doing throughout the entire community for our capital projects. It also supports our strategic partnerships that we have outside with other partners. We have our Palmetto Breeze match that we do for public transportation. That's a little short of $150,000. Our public defender's office that we partner with to do indigent defense. That's part of our court where they provide an attorney for somebody who can't afford it. That's indigent defense. And then as well as our partnerships with USCB for water testing and microbial testing, as well as our ambassador program, which does teaches people about Bluffton and makes them ambassadors for our community.
I'll jump in real quick.
Yes, ma'am.
In the past, Palmetto Breeze would come to present to us, and I know they've been asking for more and more. Is that something, if not this year, next year, just to make sure they come before at a workshop?
We'll be more than glad to have them.
I think there are a lot of questions we always have of them, and it'd be nice to have them present to us.
Yes, we're more than glad to get them. And if you would like, even if it's not part of the budget, we can have them come sometime maybe in the fall and have them do an update on how their ridership and programs are going, because I don't think we've heard from them since I've been here.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was pre-COVID since the last time we heard from them. So it wouldn't be bad to have them in here and just give an update on how ridership and programs and all that are going. So we'll work on that.
Spencer, I'm going to interrupt. The $40,000 for Beaufort County Economic Development Corporation, is that every year?
Yes, sir.
Is used as,
That's used to help fund economic development, to pay for the salaries and for the positions that are there. Every municipality in the county supports with the same amount of funding equally.
same
all of
thing,
us.
but we're the only ones that give him an office at our building?
I think does he pay rent for that?
Yes.
He pays rent for that.
They have
Oh, he
one.
does pay rent? Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I'm making a note about Palmetto Breeze.
I'm curious on that
How much
topic. Is there like a, and you probably know better than most of us, is there like a scorecard of, since they're representing everyone, where does everything go? Is there like a scorecard to kind of indicate where the money's being, where the benefit is being spread?
He is going through his review right now, and that's been in this big world of economic development and all the pieces that have to be put together. One comment from all the municipalities was his coming to give us updates and be more engaged with us. So
Normally he comes at strategic planning, but again, if we want to have him more frequently, we can always have him come more frequently to council, like maybe once every 6 months, and see if that addresses, or we can do once, we've gotten to where I know one of the issues we had with DRCI is you'd hear from them at strategic plan or budget, and then we wouldn't really hear a lot. So now we have them coming every quarter to give updates, and I think that's helped. So we can always have them come and address council if that's something that you would like.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I'm opposed or anything like that. I'm just indicating, for example, if we went 5 or 6 years and we've given them $250,000, but nothing came back, it would be nice to know that.
I agree. And he does it every month, which, all of us are everywhere, but very few other elected officials come, except the county, like 4 of the county council members come. And it's usually me and Chris.
Or David.
Don Ryan, but I can get that now. Maybe I need to do a better job too, since that's my job as liaison for y'all. So, but yes, I can get it for you. And I do think he needs to come.
Got it down. The other thing with Don Ryan Center as well is City of Hardeeville. We do partnership with them. They actually contract us. We are hoping that they will approve a 3-year extension of that contract at their June meeting, and then you'll have it on your agenda for June to approve our side of it. And they seem pleased with that. David's done well with that. He's gone out and met with their manager and council a couple times, and he's actually done trainings and some stuff over there, and seems to be working well. They seem a lot happier now than they were a year ago. Also, on accommodations tax request, we have our Historic District Welcome Center, which is the Hayward House, as well as our DMO, which is the Hilton Head Bluffton Chamber of Commerce, and that's that percentage based on the revenue from state accommodations tax. And we'll get into that more as we get into the different sources. I did want to talk about, in the consolidated, there is some proposed master fee schedule changes. It was in your binder that you received, some of the changes that were in red. One of them is, some of it's just updating some rates that haven't changed in a while, like the off-duty police officer with the cost, with the increase we've had with salaries, benefits, and all that. It's just adjusting that for the first time in about 3 or 4 years to make that more in line. Same thing with our cleaning fee. We just renewed our cleaning contract, and now the cleaning for per cleaning has gone up, so we're just passing that on for the rentals. We would add the Buckwalter Place Commerce Park in there, and that is the one for the amphitheater. So just while we're talking about that, the Part B is what we consider the amphitheater park. That is the one we just purchased from Cigna, where it has, and we had discussions about potentially breaking it up and renting it as different sections, but with it being completely gated, and if somebody's doing something in the amphitheater and you still have other people in the green, it just made more sense to rent out the entire park within the gate as an event venue. And then we would also have Park A, which is our current one, our Veterans Park, that can still be rented out as well. So the fees that are proposed for there are right there. So it's similar to what we charge for Wright Family and Martin Family Park now. We wanted to keep it in line with that, since so we didn't want to create an undue burden on this new park for anybody who wanted to rent it. So we kept it in line with Martin and right family. Yes, sir.
That park is still being challenged by one of our residents with people letting their dog run free.
Okay.
So
Which part, Fred?
the one he just showed with the gate around it, Park B.
Oh,
I think I saw that last week when I rode by there.
You gotta fix that.
Okay. I'll follow up with Chief on that again. And I'll double check. I thought Derek might have been in here. Double check and see if we have signage to make sure if we need to improve our signage there as
I think
well.
it's a dog park, actually.
Well, that's how they're using it because
It's gated.
the guy who was normally doing it continued to do the same thing, even though he'd been told not to do that.
All right. I'll get with Chief and we'll get it. Growth management fees. A couple of them is just to make a lot of our permits the same price. So some may go up $10, some may go down $10, but to be consistent throughout. One of the ones that we added in is a comp plan print fee. So we just adopted our new comp plan. It's been a while since we had one. We had somebody came in and asked if they could if we would make them a print bound copy. And we didn't have a cost in there for being able to do that. We have it in there for a lot of our other plans. So we wanted to make it's pretty much the same as printing and doing one for our stormwater ordinance. I think it's 75 or 90. What did we set it at?
My pages.
I think 90, at 90. So, and if you've seen it, we reached out just to see what it'd be to print one at Staples, and I think it was more than that. So
I would imagine it is.
yeah, with it being in color and so we wanted to make it reasonable, but we didn't want to make it just so that everybody's going to come in and ask for one and we're going to lose a bunch of money off of it. But so that's a new one that's in there. And then as well as the stormwater maintenance fees, there's another NPEDS inspection fee. Now that we have stormwater ponds and facilities that are finishing up and coming online, this is an inspection fee to come out and do the inspection to make sure it's operating efficiently. And so since we're using staff time no different than we are for a construction inspection, it would just add a fee in for that as well.
What's the adding notice of termination fees mean?
That's a new inspection. So as stormwater permits are closing out, as a project is ending, there's a notice of termination inspection that makes sure that your as-bills are actually there. Again, it's covering staff time so that we can then say, yes, that stormwater permit can be closed.
So now that we're getting a lot of these that are coming to end, it's getting them closed and then the ongoing inspections year over year.
Just wouldn't get used to those fees because we are dwindling, we are on the other side of it. So I hate to be adding fees to know at some point y'all are going to have to live without them.
And I don't know that we even bumped up the fee revenue off of those based on.
No, not really. I think it stayed pretty much status quo.
We talked about that. So now we're going to get into the general fund. Oh,
No, keep going. I don't know when to ask this question. Stop.
is it about a specific fund?
No, it's more, it might be a CIP question. If it's a maintenance question on projects, is that more next week?
Well, maintenance after the first year really goes into the general fund, so it may be a general fund question.
Okay. I'll ask it before you get started.
Go ahead.
I've actually followed Boo Harrell, who talked to you about the
docks.
docks. So it made me think about the others. And while ago, we always had some kind of amount set aside in the budget for maintenance. I just don't know if it's still there, and we can look at it. But that dock especially is so expensive, but it's also expensive to replace. And do we have it in the budget to keep the oil and
Yes,
the
and
work?
they do it twice a year.
And it is done
And it's
that
in the
way.
budget, and they actually, we don't get into the actual, like, what, y'all don't get all of that. When we go through it, like, they may have Wright Family Park maintenance, and within that, they might have dock staining, mulch, and all the breakdown in there. But they have maintenance for every park, and they have a maintenance schedule they have for every park when they do everything. And they just, and they do it twice a year in the spring and in the fall to make sure it's ready for the winter and make sure it's ready for the heat.
And it is to keep that type of wood fresh and not
The
just
IPE.
power wash. Perfect.
By the way, I
I
commend,
had that, so I will check that off.
always have, I mean, we're known for our parks along with other things, and we keep our parks up, you know, we really do. We maintain them well, so that's a kudo to.
They do a great job at that. And that's one of those, Derek always asks for a lot of money for those. So they're important.
Money to make.
It is.
They do a lot of work.
They do. So, so we're trying to make it a little different. We're trying to add on a little more than words this year. I'll thank Natalie for that. She tried to make it a little more visually interesting this year. So the general fund, as you know, it accounts and reports financial resources for the town's primary operating fund. And its primary resources are property taxes, license, permits, and intergovernmental. So start out, talk about our property taxes. So our estimated value of a mill, went over this during first reading. As you can see, it's gone up by about $30,000 over last year per mill, which is about $30 million worth of estimated value for fiscal year 24. Again, to remember, this is pre-reassessment. With Act 388, reassessment is capped. So the most a property can go up is 15%. And I don't know how much we're actually going to go up to capture with so many properties turning over in the last 4 or 5 years, but we're assuming that it's still going to be a pretty significant increase. We may cap out at our 15%, but
I would
just
imagine you would.
because you're going to have a lot of people who, if you lived here for 5-6 years, the property value increases, you haven't captured that on your property, you'll probably hit that cap of 15%. But it is capped at 15%. So this shows you our millage rate being for operating general fund is 36.8. For our debt service is 1.7. Recommends keeping that the same. Also keep that note in there on reassessment. Just gives you a kind of a pie chart breakdown of what makes up our revenues. You can see about 40% of it is license and permits, about 30% is property taxes, and then the rest of it's broken up over transfer ins, grants, intergovernmental, revenue, services, stuff like that. So we're about not quite a three-legged table, but property taxes are about a third, license and permits a little over a third, and then all the rest make up about 30%. So pretty balanced out there. This gives it to you in numbers with a little more breakdown so you can see where the license and permit percentage comes from. What makes that up, you can see your business licenses, franchise fees, the municipal association collections, and you can see some of those are going up based on the growth that we've had. We're going to have more brokerage, more insurance. Things like telecommunication are actually going down because less people have phones in their home now and stuff like that. So you can see the telecommunications is budgeted to be $50,000 a year. Back in the day, if every home had a phone, that would probably be hundreds of thousands versus 50,000. But that's where we are nowadays. And then you can also see the grants and entitlements, intergovernmental, and so forth, and then where the transfer ends are coming from down at the bottom, with the big increase being from hospitality tax, and that was something we talked about in first reading, and I'll go into a little more detail when we get to the end, when we get to hospitality and accommodations tax on where that money is, that increase is coming from. So this tells you where it goes. You can see about 58% goes to one of our key things, our people. And then the other 30% goes to making sure that we can operate the town and continue to move forward. And then the rest of it's going out for projects and debt. But as you can see, the vast majority is invested in operations in our town and our employees. And this gives you that financially breaking down with the numbers. So you can see where the increase in our salaries, the increase in operations, and how that's broken down. The rest of it with the transfer out to CIP and ARPA. We should be finishing up ARPA this coming budget year, right? Hopefully be done. Kind of talked a little bit about these, but these are some of the highlights for the general fund. We talked about the cost of living and the merit. It does include our PTO payout that we do for up to 25 hours. Most employees take advantage of that. They do so right around Thanksgiving and time for the holidays. It does include the additional 1% increase on the employer side of retirement. I think we have one more year left of that before we finish out. It was a 7% increase over 5 years. I think we got one more year left. Also includes 5% for our employer health insurance increase at the state. And then there's also some new positions proposed. Went over these in first reading. Nothing's changed with this, but it shows a part-time administrative assistant to help in communications and community outreach. And that's to really help them with a lot of the rental and administrative stuff that we have going on and that we've seen that growth in with them trying to do town events and all that. That's Debbie, Lindy, and Tia that provide some support to them to allow them to continue to grow what they've done. It takes the part-time customer service up front a position and makes it full-time. I can tell you we've been advertising that part-time customer service position now, I think, for like 4 or 5 months and not gotten anybody. So we're looking to make that full-time, and it'll help with the amount of business license and everything we've got. We see continuously needing additional help up there, especially if somebody's out, vacation, sick, or any of that kind of stuff. It also puts into backfill position in finance for upcoming retirement. We actually have Cindy is going to be retiring November. So this allows us to go ahead and fill her position and have somebody here to go through the audit with her so that we have that experience before she leaves. So that position will go away after Cindy leaves. That position will balance back out. Same thing we did when Vicki retired. And then as this budget year, currently y'all moved the full-time deputy clerk of court to 2 part-time court assistants. It carries that forward. And so we've got one more of those to fill. We've been holding on filling it because we brought in the assistant judge this year, and we used those funds to cover that cost for the rest of the year. And then we have the option to switch our property acquisition administrator. Right now we contract that and we have it in the budget. So if we decide that it's not working out in contract, we want to bring it in and do it as a part-time position or contract position, we'll have the ability to do that and the funds in the position available for that. And I mentioned in the first reading, similar to how we had Benny when he was here, he kind of was part-time, retired, and handled a lot of that stuff. And then we talked last time about the 6 Class 3 SRO officers that are being paid for completely by the grant. We have 3 that are going through the class now. We're still trying to hire 3 more. We had a few that fell out through the process.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So, and maybe you just said it clearly and it didn't register, but on the property acquisition, where are we? I mean, do we actually have a body that?
No, right now we have we have 2 firms under contract.
And are they working?
Yes.
Okay.
And the discussion has been based on what they're charging us to do and how fast they can actually move, whether we're happy with them or not. We want to have the position available in case it doesn't work out. We can bring somebody in staff on it. So we'll have this will allow us to have the funding and the part-time position available. But if the contract's working well and we want to keep it contracted, we won't fill the position. If it doesn't work well with the contract or the cost starts exceeding what we're getting for results, and we want to bring somebody in, we have the ability to do that.
How long have they been working?
They've been working for about 4 months right now. We were putting out a scope and actually determining if we wanted them to start on Girard or Maiden. We didn't make the headway we thought with some internal connections on Girard, so we're going to turn them loose on that. And they may assist Richardson with some legal action as well and moving through property acquisition if needed in conjunction with Ghost Roads and sewer.
Because they can do appraisals and review appraisals and all that stuff that we need for condemnation and for filing and stuff.
Are they not, because it wasn't that long ago you were talking about using them and how much easier it'd be on the ghost roads. Are they not doing what we thought? Or
We gave them some internally discussions, different directions. We were going to have them not help on the sewer because Mark had been working that for so long and put them over on Girard. And now, because we may be needing to move into some more legal action, we're investigating if it's cheaper to use them to augment our legal team instead of using the legal team. So I think Felicia and Richardson have been working on price comparisons on that.
I'm assuming you'll be using them for boundary and Calhoun for streetscape and very.
One way or the other, whether it's whether it's the consultants under MSA or the part-time person, yes, it's beyond just the ghost roads. It would be in support of all easement acquisitions for all projects.
Just a matter of making sure if we don't get the results that we're expecting, then we have the option. So again, some of the expenditure highlights, and then we'll get into the departments, is it supports professional development and our staff certifications. Also continues our contract for garbage service. I will say we have received notice from them about recycling and some issues they're having. I think they are closing a recycle center that's closed, and they're going to have to start hauling further. So we're going to have to sit down with them and work through some details on that. Counties received the same notice. So we'll keep you up to date on how those conversations go over the next few weeks and see how that may affect our recycling service or our cost per recycling container. Again, it supports our PD recruitment, our mental health program. We talked about our Class 3 officers, our historic preservations programs, and we talked about Don Ryan Center and the different programs they put on. It also keeps our partnerships that we have. Got Let's See 43, our crossing guards, domestic violence assistance, drug task force, and so forth. Talked about our neighborhood plan updates, continuing our vehicle lease program for our police to keep their equipment up to date, and also enhances our support of affordable housing initiatives. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. And then our beautification committee work plan. So we're going to start going through by department here. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. As you can see, everybody's up a little bit based on position. You can see the police is the big one because they've got 9 SROs that are new, but we have the grant in there to offset that expenditure. So when you add in, I said 9, I think it's 6 SROs, Class 3 SROs. So when we have a grant to offset that, that's going to be the majority of their increase that's associated with that.
That's going to be 35% of 10 million?
That, and they have equipment in there as well that they are replacing that's pretty, like radios and some other stuff that's pretty expensive.
The 35% is not the total general fund budget.
Oh, that's the total percent of the budget, not increase. Sorry. We'll talk about this individual increases in a minute. So this gives you,
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. This,
It's a bus for us.
yeah, sorry.
To say that, I want that job.
My misstatement, I apologize. They make up 35% of our budget. And then you can
The
see
whole
the next,
department, not the increase.
next biggest department is going to be growth management, followed by IT, then you're going to get into public services and stuff like that. So last year when we did the class and comp, we kind of broke down and we talked about like what our average pay is, our median pay, and we went through some of that stuff. So I wanted to kind of revisit that again this year and show how things are progressing up and just continue that conversation from last year. So pre-class and comp, this was what before May of last year, before council adopted it. Our average salary was around 62.5. Our median salary was around 56. You can see currently after class and comp and our 2% COLA we did in January, our average salary is just over 69,000. Our median is just over 62,000. So it's been about a 10 to 11% increase from where we were this time last year to where we are now. You can see that in the hourly rate below. Our average hourly rate was $30 an hour. Currently, it's about $33.30. And then you can see, again, we're pushing close to about 11% increase over where we were to where we are today for our employees for their increase, for the average pay increase over the last year. Looking at what's proposed, you would see with the 2% COLA, it would actually take our average salary over $70,000. It would take our median salary to about $63,500, and that would be an average increase of about $1,400 per employee through the town. And then it would get our average hourly rate up to just short of $34 an hour. With the 2-year mid-year merit, you can see it would take us up about the average employee up about another $1,400. So that'd be about $2,800 total for the year, and get our average hourly rate up to about $34.65. So a lot of improvement from where we were a year ago to where we're going to be at the end of this fiscal year. So I know it's been a priority for council. Y'all brought it up last budget meeting. I just wanted to show how that's progressing and share that for your information. Part of that as well is kind of looking at where everybody falls, kind of within $10,000 bands within the town. As you can see, before pre-class and comp, we had 7 that were below $40,000. Afterwards, we had those 7 went away, and you can see the breakdown there. We had 27 that were below 50, 27 that were 50 to 60, and as we see the COLA and we see the 2% mid-year, we get down to only 20 people that are below $50,000 per year, and we'll have the majority of our employees between that $50,000 to $80,000 to $90,000 range. So again, bringing that average pay up, bringing the minimum pay people out of below 40,000, getting them up into higher. So the changes that y'all have asked to make that we've implemented has resulted in getting people higher within their bands and getting them more compensation to match what is needed. So this gives breakdown of the number of personnel per department. And so as you can see, there's 150 approved full-time for the current fiscal year. We would go to 157 next year. Again, 6 of those are SROs. 1 would be taking the part-time to full-time at customer service. Would it be the full-time? Is that the full-time for?
Customer service.
Part-time to full-time, sorry, thank you. And then you can see a couple part-time in the municipal court. We talked about that. The part-time and executive was there. The change is finance and admin. What's the 0.5 there? That's the customer service up front. Thank you, sharing that position. Sorry, I had a brain lapse there. And then the one in finance and admin would be the gap one that we're going to be covering for Cindy until her retirement. Then you can see the other ones are part-time for the customer service, part-time for the 5 sworn in the police department, and then part-time being split between IT and executive. So just to go down a little bit department by department, and as we've mentioned, we're going to have a new part-time position here for communications and community outreach. That's what's making up the increase in the salaries, the big increase there. And that, like I said, that'll be there to help support the growth we've seen as we have Lindy doing more events throughout town. She's really needing assistance for people who are wanting to do rentals, who need to just have somebody go and show them the Rotary Center, take them down to Martin Family, and just to fill out the paperwork, do the special event permits. Her doing the events have taken a lot of that. It's really taxed her, so this will give them the support they need based on the amount of events that they've taken on. So that's where that's coming from. And as well as a good portion of their operating is the events they actually put on, and that's part of the transfer that we make from hospitality tax is to put on the town events, the 4th of July, the movie series, Christmas parade, and so forth.
Question on that, Stephen, if you go back. You mentioned that a portion of that is from H-Tax. Is that also inclusive of funds from A-Tax to support those similar functions?
Did we move some from A-Tax, or were they all H-Tax? There's some from A-Tax as well. Okay. Yeah. When we get to the breakdown, I think it shows what's coming, what they're taking from each of those. Sorry, skipped. So Don Ryan Center for Innovation, you can see they're 23, 24, not much difference between the two except for the decrease in the operating, and that was the ARPA funds they received for the grant programs being expended and going away.
Yeah.
So into the executive office, salaries, the increase we have here is an increase for half of one of the positions. We are splitting a position with IT. We have somebody who's working in IT and also doing our DEI program. So she's being split 50% with half the position reporting to Chris for that, another half being working in IT and administrative support. So that's a little bit of an increase and change in there. So for finance and admin, we talked about their big difference is going to be for that full-time position that's going to be in there for the gap. So that's what's making up a lot of the salary and benefits and the increase in the salary and benefits that are there. Growth management, they're the ones getting the half a position, correct? For the customer service up front, or?
Shared, yeah.
Shared.
Full-time to shared.
Yeah, so part of that is that shared position up front, and the benefits, now that it'll be going from part-time to full-time, it will receive full benefits. So that position has got a little increased cost in there. The big operating decline is taking out the comp plan because we're done. So that gets to be removed from the budget. Instead, it'll be replaced with funds for updating our neighborhood plans, which we're doing more internal, and that cost may be having somebody draw some plans, draw some designs, or to put the books together and bind them. So the affordable housing work plan, this is our neighborhood assistance plan. You can see for fiscal year revised, we amended that budget up to $310,000. The goal for next year is to have that funded at similar level, which is $290,000, which is a $100,000 increase over where it was this year. I can tell you that I think out of the additional $100,000 we gave him, I think Vicky's just about used all of that. So I think having those funds, they'll get used. So, but it does have an increase of $100,000 in there for next year.
Now, I just want to be clear, because I see your asterisk. This moves over to, it carries forward to her plan. It doesn't just go away, right? So if that 3580 isn't spent, it goes toward the next year's budget. And any unspent will be transferred from general fund to capital improvement program fund. Does that mean the same thing?
It would go into the CIP. Any remaining amount would go to CIP.
If we have that affordable housing CIP fund,
That she gets to utilize on neighborhood assistance?
No.
we haven't utilized it because we haven't had a need for it. This is the first year where we've actually expended all of our funds. In the past, that affordable housing, what's been left, has gone carried forward into the affordable housing CIP fund. And we're using those funds, or what will be used for the May River project and other ones like that. If we get to a point where we need more money and you want to take some out of there, I think we can move the funds out of there, Chris, back into?
Let me re-ask it. I might have not asked it right. The neighborhood assist, now are we talking about affordable housing, or are we talking about, I'm talking about the neighborhood assist, Vicky's program.
Right. What's been left in the neighborhood assistance, it's called an affordable housing work plan. What's been left in there every year, what's left gets rolled over into the capital project fund, which is the affordable housing CIP line item.
But I thought we had asked, I didn't know when it changed. I thought it was always a carryover from year to year, because there have been years we hadn't spent a penny. And I know we've asked for more, but if she does have leftover, I don't want to use it or lose it year to year. And I was always of the impression, unless it got changed somewhere, that she would always have that money. If she had $5,000 left, it goes, now she has $295,000. Not that it goes because she's using it or losing it now.
So to carry money from one budget year to the next budget year, it has to be carried in some sort of fund, and so when your general fund runs out, you adopt a brand new general fund. We either have to put that money in our reserve fund, we have to put it in our not capital reserve, what's the word I'm looking for? Not our debt, what's our, unassigned reserve funds. And if we want to use those reserves and put them in the budget for next year, we can. But what we've done to carry that money from year to year is to move it to the CIP, because CIP can carry budget multiple budget years.
And that's the first time I've heard that.
So
Yeah, that's.
I didn't realize
that's
that
not-
either.
No, that's not new. That's, what was happening was, even when Mark was here, the CI, the fund got large because we hadn't done a project yet. And so what they did is they started rolling it over to what he just said, to the CIP
Into the
fund,
CIP.
so it could be utilized for a housing program.
So,
Yeah, but that's not what we asked for.
Yeah, I clearly remember Fred so clearly saying, because we also were using it or losing it on the land acquisition, and now it rolls over.
into a CIP fund.
can I just explain really quickly? So my first year, Mark had requested that that accumulated amount be moved over to the CIP for the affordable housing project. And so that's when that first occurred. And annually since then, whatever was left over, we moved over to the CIP. One of the reasons for that is, one is we were trying to work on a major affordable housing project that we needed capital funds for. But the other is when you accumulate a lot in unassigned fund balance, and then you pull from that to fund operations in the next year's budget, it's looked upon negatively by rating agencies. So you only want to spend fund balance on one-time costs, but since these were your operating budget for neighborhood assistance program, it looks bad since how big it was, how significant it was.
But that's confusing the program, because you almost like you're saying they're one and the same, and then they're not.
Well, I'm not saying they're one and the same, but I'm just saying that we had a significant amount accumulated, and it was identified as money for the affordable housing project.
So is there a way, okay, there's $3,580 left. Okay, but wonder if it was $35,000. And Vicki, if I was Vicki, I'd be using it with Johnny on the spot, and it's really not taking care. I just feel like there's more of an urgency to use it. Is there no way to mark it? And I get with the rating, I'm all about the rating, but is there any way to mark it somewhere that now Affordable Housing Committee doesn't expect $35,000 to go to that project, that Vicki can pull from that without having to get a whole new budget, and I'm looking at both of y'all, but whole new amendment like we had to do for her last June?
If she finds individuals that need it and the funds can be committed prior to year end, then they get carried forward as a prior commitment. But otherwise, it just sits in fund balance, general fund balance as a surplus.
Bottom line is, it's not, they're two, as we're saying, they're two distinct programs. But at the end of the day, the money that carried over, because again, the count got large, so and I remember Mark saying, let's move it over.
It was rarely used.
But it wasn't being used. So, but now we have a housing program, and there's money there to fund it, and that's what it was all about. And so, and we had never actually ran out of money before in the almost 8 years that I've been sitting at the table. This last time was the first time we've ever had that situation.
I always thought it was carried over. I mean, I
It
appreciate
was carryover.
I don't know how we can think.
It was carryover. I made a strong argument for that, and Lisa supported it, and so did Larry. It was carried over.
So as part of the 2021 budget is when Mark requested that it move into CIP for the affordable housing project.
He didn't exactly tell us all of that, so now we're here with, and it's understandable how to, well, I'll let you talk.
I just said he gave a great solution. It would just be a matter of communicating that with Vicki in terms of if she sees that she has funds that potentially are going to be carried over, making it having the prior commitment.
I don't agree that that's a great solution. I think that's making her work harder to save money that's in that budget year, and sometimes that's superficial. I think it should just be carried over.
Well, I was saying great solution in terms of if it's something that would impact our rating in not a way that we're able to work around. I don't know what other options we
The
would.
thing I would say is, based on the way it's been handled, technically every dollar that's sitting in the affordable housing program to use has been carryover from this program. So the however many million dollars that's sitting in there came specifically from this program, correct?
It did.
Yeah. So I mean, that's your carry forward. So the discussion we can have is, we have to put a number associated. We can't. If you want to give a program free rein and give it a blank check, I think that's a that's a scary thing to do.
Right.
I think what we can do is we can say, if you want to use some of those funds that we've carried forward to help supplement the program, is we can look at doing a transfer to make that happen. And then as we do like mid-year budget amendments, if she's getting ahead, we can always move money back over. The other thing to remember is we also have a new pot of fund set of funds that's going to be available with the state law that passed. And I'll get into that in a minute, which is we can now use up to 15% of our accommodations tax on affordable housing projects. So we can have that conversation if we want to use that to help support more of what we're doing with our affordable housing public-private partnership and let those funds go back to
So
neighborhood
I
assistance.
get all that, but next year, if her carryover is, I don't care if it's $20, that's helping somebody. I just don't want the affordable housing slide to show there's all this money to go toward a housing project when we know good and well it needs to go to neighborhood assistance. And Mark glossed over that, but he's not here anymore, so I'm glad we all know it. How does land acquisition carry over every year?
It's a CIP.
CIP.
Because it started in CIP.
But again, when that fund got large, as we talked about last time, they moved $1 million, I think it was, wasn't it, recently? Because the problem, Lisa, is, as you know, is if they hadn't created the CIP for housing, this number would be $1.4 million right now or something like that. That was the only reason it ever got created.
Well,
I remember us having the conversation about
I get
keeping it not necessarily clearly in the same thing, but not shorting it each year, funding the same amount no matter how much was left.
Well, I think what happened,
You know, if there was a balance here, don't stop funding it just because it's sitting at $50,000. Continue to put the same amount in every year.
Which has been occurring. The same amount's been
And
going
the
in.
money's just going into
And it hasn't
affordable
been
housing
spent.
CIP instead of.
Right, until this year. This is the first year that we've had the issue where all the funds have been spent and we've had to put more. So for the budget for next year, we're recommending that it be put at the same level we amended it to for this current year.
I think it's worth looking at carefully this year. And I think we need to monitor this, and maybe you can provide, because this has.
Chris and I can have
this
some
is a-
conversations and see what.
This
what
to me
they
is one
have-
of the
we can do.
best programs that it took a long time to get good.
What was our initial startup in this last year's budget?
198,000.
So we bumped it 200,000 basically this past year.
100,000.
A little over 100,000.
Tonight.
I honestly, I'm sure we were told oh yeah, we'll carry it over, and all of a sudden we just lost track of it.
Where'd we get the 100,000 to put in there?
This year, we
Yeah.
took it from ARPA funds that were left over, and we used ARPA funds for it. Next year, it's coming out of general fund operating.
I mean, at the end of the day, the numbers we're speaking about were all for housing, whether it's neighborhood assistance or
Right.
housing.
I
That's where
think
the
that's
money's
where I
at.
got
It's still sitting
confused,
there.
too.
It's there.
But it can easily get confused. That's what I'm afraid of. I don't want housing to eat it up because, matter of fact, we're getting ready to do a project, and it could easily get confused. So when we started this program was supposed to stand on its own leg, and that's why it's important.
Let Chris and I have some conversations about it like we did with the last year with some stuff that came up, and when we get to the second reading, we can have some ideas that we can look at.
And listen, ratings are amazing for me. We don't need to drop a rating because we did something wrong in the budget, whatever it's called. But I think we need to ask for more reports like this more occasionally. Maybe it's quarterly to see where she is. Because I worked long ago with a business and dealt with federal government, and it was use it or lose it. And it was the most worthless spending of money. They'd almost like hoard items because they knew the next year you're going to lose it. And I'm just not a fan of that. And I don't want Vicki to go down a path of, oh my God, I've got 10,000 left and it's December and I'm gonna have to put it to somebody. And she's passionate about this. I would do it. I'd find people and applications and then that just puts her in a really bad place. When January, she might still need that money, but then, or whatever the budget, you know what I mean, crossing over a budget year, and I just don't want to put her in that position because it's such a great program now. So, y'all, Orsted.
Well, let us have some conversations. We'll come back with Tuesday with some options.
Realistic, all departments try to spend all their money anyway, don't y'all?
If it's not spent by tomorrow, they're cut off.
I know the answer.
Chris has the tendency to go and take it away from them before they can spend it all.
Chris.
Actually, when we get to this time of the year, it's the time where we can say, hey, there's funds, let's not spend it for next year, let's spend it for, and that way it
I
gives
think
us a
you've been
head
doing
start.
great on it, and just positions not filled, you find a way. I mean, I think the way you're handling it is great. This was a major oversight on my part.
Well,
Should have known better.
Like I said, let Chris and I sit down. We'll look at some options, and even if it's carrying forward, with CIP, we can designate it, and we can break it up over different, like we do with, like this, how it's broken up. We can look at CIP, and maybe a certain percentage of it is for our projects, and a certain percentage for is to carry forward for neighborhood assistance, and as we need it, we can always go over there and grab it and transfer.
And we can always amend this in the middle of the year if we need to.
Just like we did this
If it's
year.
not enough, we put an extra 100,000 in there last year,
Yeah, but.
so we can do it again if we needed to.
Yeah, but then, Larry, that was ARPA money, so it was easy to do that. It was like money that we didn't have.
Money that was given to us.
Right, so.
Somebody else's money.
But the fund balance would be, the CIP money that's sitting there could serve that role now, in the future if we need it. Because like you said, we'll look into it. We'll come back with some options next meeting, and we can dig into it a little once we have our thoughts better and give y'all some options that are supportive of what you're wanting to do.
Before we move on, so I'm clear, because again, I mean, I understand what we've been doing, but on the transfer back that you just mentioned a minute ago, for example, if we needed another 50,000, you could go over to the CIP housing fund. If it's a large number, which it has been, you transfer it back. I guess the question in my mind on this topic would be, what do we project? In other words, once the actual program kicks in on the housing side with Mr. Herb Kurzman, are we projecting we'll use up all that money in a calendar year, or do we know the answer to that?
Well, we've got that in here on what those numbers would look like.
Right.
And that's where I think we have the option to visit that and say, okay, if we want to designate this for affordable housing and actually use that for our projects, then that'll help reduce the burden or what we may need from that CIP to free it up to support, the neighborhood assistance program more. But let me get to that, and then, like I said, let us look at what that would look like and how that is going to play in the budget, and we'll come back on Tuesday with better discussion and points on that.
And maybe just a thought, if it could be done, have a separate line item on CIP for this.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
I've got to hit maybe 5, so I'm going to pass the
Baton,
baton to him.
the mallet.
I'll watch it.
All right, let's get it moving, Steve.
If I'd have gone faster, we'd have missed
Out
that.
of class.
Something to throw at him.
I asked the last question. In other words, if the money's not going to be there, then
All
we
right,
need
Mr. Chief, let's move on.
All right, so next we have HR. As you can see, it's slightly down a little bit on operating, but and benefits, but salaries just slightly increased from merit and COLA increases. Then IT, like I mentioned, there's a half position that's gone into IT that's raised their salaries up a little bit for that portion of that position and benefits. And then they have just some operating with some increases to, how software is. Once you get in them every year, they're going to increase their maintenance and operating costs year over year. So we're seeing those Microsoft, all those kind of things increase year over year. So they've got some of those in there. Legislative Department, this is y'all. You see, keeping no increase on pay. Make sure we say that publicly. That's staying level. And just the benefit in there is just the increase that's coming from the increase to retirement and insurance coming from the state. And then operating, we have elections this year, so we have to put in there for election expenses to be enough to cover a runoff and the election. So we have to cover 2 elections. And then municipal court, this is going up slightly over last year, just based on increases, as well as we have the new associate judge that got appointed last year, and where that part-time position covered the salary last year, we'll have to cover that. We'll have to include that part-time salary for this year, so there's a little increase there. But the benefits are down because we took that part-time to 2, or that full-time to 2 part-time, so it removes the insurance and all. Police department, here's where we see the increase from the SRO positions. It's about $400,000 total, and then you can see the benefits as well in there. And then part of the increase in operating is our vehicle lease that we're continuing forward. It goes up a little bit. It goes up year over year as we get more vehicles on it. Projects and watershed resiliency, just some increases in salaries, benefits, no new positions, but operating's up just a little bit. Public services, increase in pay, benefits a little bit, and then operating, pretty much he's keeping everything running. There's no new positions in there for public services this year. As we get closer to the new Riverside barn coming online, and if we start moving forward, like where we brought in Evercore, this is a department where next year we'll probably be looking at some new positions, because he's going to need them to be able to maintain the parks that we're adding in and that we're constructing throughout the town. So just want to give you a primer on that for next year, that you may see a position or 2 in there to assist with maintenance of the projects that we're building. So they have a beautiful...
Let me jump in. I mean, excuse me, but he's having trouble now replacing the positions he's got, isn't he?
Actually, he's fully staffed, except for he's got 1 part-time person instead of a full-time right now. So he just hired 2 people in the last couple of months.
Very good.
And Chris doesn't know this yet. Nothing like throwing financial stuff randomly out in the middle of a meeting for Chris. One of the things Derek and I talked about is maybe looking at how he's got that part-time position. He's using a full-time position for a part-time person now. Is maybe looking at some seasonal help that may just come in during the summer, but we hadn't talked about that yet. So I figured that's something Derek brought up to me when he was out of town earlier this week. He goes out of town and they start coming and asking me for stuff. All right, so Derek also oversees the beautification committee work plan. You can see one of the new items that they added in for this year is seasonal planting for the pots. I don't know if you noticed that all of our potters and planters throughout Old Town, they completely redid them this year. I'll say they look great. I may disagree, but I think they look a whole lot better, and they're all uniform now. So he added in for the beautification committee to come up with a plan to replant those annuals every year to make sure that they're consistent and they're all the same and that they're look nice year over year. Townwide, this is where we do our residential garbage collection, our insurance for all our equipment, premiums. This is where our Palmetto Breeze match comes from, our reforestation program and all of that. So this just, I won't say it's a catch-all, but as you can see, the vast majority of it is operating, and that's where we pay in our insurance, our and stuff like that we cover for all the town comes out of that department. So, and then we also move over to CIP, a little over $2.5 million per year. You can see this is what's proposed for next year to move over to assist with those programs.
Go back, please. So you have for Buckwalter Place, multi-county commerce park.
Yes, sir.
How many phases is that?
That's it.
Okay.
Phase 2 will be it. And that's that we're actually marketing it out in RFP right now, asking for interest to develop it because we're carrying a lot of utility tax credits. We've been carrying the CIP project forward for years. So we've put it out and we've asked people to come in and give us proposals on how they would develop our pads out there and try to move that forward as quickly as we can so we can kind of get some of these things we're holding off the books. This gives you a breakdown by department, and again, it's not a 35.1% increase for the police. They make up 35% of our budget. You can see the breakdown there on where the rest of it goes. So special revenue funds, this is where we'll talk about some of the changes, some of the things we were talking about earlier. Our hospitality tax is 2% that's collected on all prepared meals, food, drinks throughout the town. And so for fiscal year 24, it's estimated to make about $3.8 million. And then interest is just minimum. It's better than it was, but it's still minimum in a fund like this. You can see about 72% of it gets transferred out into CIP projects, and then the other 28% is going to be transferred out into the general fund to offset expenses that we have, like Councilman Frazier was talking about earlier, for police at events, for cultural activities, for stuff like that. This gives you that breakdown on where those funds are going. And this tells you some of the funds that the CIP, that the hospitality funds are going to support. You can see our historic district sewer, drainage programs, parks, Squire Pope Carriage House, and all sorts of things like that. Good. So then we get into our local accommodations tax. This is 3% of gross proceeds derived from rental and charges for sleeping accommodations. It does propose removing 8% down from that it normally was going to the DMO to zero. 63.6, half of it would go into the general fund to offset expenses that we have for, like we talked about with our police that go out and support events that receive accommodations tax, like Mayfest, Arts and Seafood, and stuff like that. And the other portion would go to the CIP, and I think we were proposing to use it for the interior renovations for Squire Pope. Is that right, Chris? Is that what you said?
I'm sorry.
The interior renovations for Squire Pope? All right.
So with that, I understand what's on here to show us what it is. But wouldn't that change? I mean, wouldn't that just go along with all the rest of it?
What?
You know, this 100-something thousand that the chamber used to get.
That's that total.
I know.
Yeah.
But like, if we're not giving it away, wouldn't it just be grouped with all the rest of it now and not be its own? I mean, you wouldn't show us you wouldn't be showing us where the 8% is going next year, right?
We could.
I mean, yeah, but you wouldn't.
No, but we wanted to.
You wouldn't normally do that. I mean, where's?
You wouldn't like it like this?
Yeah, no. We just did that because this is a change for this year.
That's what
Going
I'm
to be
saying.
absorbed into the general.
Right. We just wanted to show you where it's going to support other priorities throughout the town.
Right. Okay.
And like the 63.9 that we said, we talked about where could we use it. We're like, it makes sense to use for Squire Pope. That doesn't mean that it has to go to Squire Pope. It can go to CIP and we can use it for any project that ATAX supports. So this gives you the revenue side of it. So we're estimated to generate about $1.6 million in local accommodations tax for next year. And then you can see the vast majority of it, as we mentioned, goes out to CIP projects and then a little bit into the general fund. And these are the CIP projects that the local accommodations tax are supporting in next year's fiscal year, in next year's budget.
Quick question. People, I see we have on here pathway pedestrian safety improvements.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we on? I know there was a presentation made before about looking at towns similar to ours and how they construct their pedestrian safety items, particularly looking at our old town where there's a lot of foot traffic. Where are we on that?
You talking about with the raised crosswalks and stuff
Yes.
like that and all that? I know we're doing a
Grant application in front of the federal Department of Transportation that is to be announced in June, and that is to look at an overall pathway pedestrian safety study, not only for the historic district, but moving up along Godey Schultz and then coming up in a study area into Buck Island, Simmonsville as well. So at this point in time, we haven't moved forward waiting on that. That's a two-piece application which had the overall study and then could go into actual design of crosswalk improvements, the engineered design phase of it. So we're at a standstill right now for another month on it. Our plan then, one way or the other, will move forward with the funding that we currently propose for pathway and pedestrian safety improvements. That will continue phase 2 of the crosswalk improvements for ADA compliance in fiscal year 24. We'll move forward with that at least, and then we'll put on what we can through our professional services, focusing on more comprehensive traffic safety, and then bring those forward. I would say we'd probably come back to you in workshop in October or January with some ideas, is the hope.
The other part of that is with Calhoun and Boundary, as we're designing those streetscapes, they will be included in those streetscapes.
Well, that's what the point I wanted to get to, is making that a priority. I'm glad to know that we're doing like a comprehensive one with our other areas too, but that area is just becoming increasingly more dangerous. Just coming here today, like without having, that designated signage, pedestrians just walk whenever, however, and I witnessed someone almost being hit just in coming here. So it's like we have to do something there. So there's like a clear indication of who should be moving at what time, because the foot traffic there is way heavier in comparison to other places. And I don't think we can wait on that.
And I have to agree there. I see it through there 20 times a day, it seems like. And it's just a bomb about to explode when somebody gets hurt there. It's just too much. It's too busy not to do something, and we got the money, so let's go ahead and try to do something there.
Well, and we can look at some of these that we're like we did on Lawrence, and here some of these that we're looking at for the streetscapes. We can look at some temporary traffic calming to, like we did on Lawrence by the parks. We can look at more of that in the interim until we get the design, and because the thing is, I hate to go out and make an investment on something and then rip it all up when we do the streetscape in another 9 to 12 months. But we can always look at temporary, like we did recently.
Even a flashing light,
intersection.
or something, pedestrian cross, something.
I'm not against throwing up some speed bumps if we need to.
Not enough speed bumps.
Yeah, I don't know, right? Because what the main problem is,
Well, if it's on May River, no. But
I don't know if they hit the bump or something.
the cars are for the most part are respectful, and if they see someone walking, but it's just the people walking, like they're like, if I'm crossing, you stop and wait on me. I don't care how fast you're going, I'm going to walk, and it just creates such a dangerous.
I'm telling you, right out in front of you, it's like, fuck.
We'll look at that as well. So this goes into what we talked about in the first reading. We put a little bit to talk about how we calculated what transferred into the general fund and from hospitality and the local accommodations tax. So you can see the breakdown per department, and then kind of the methodology that Chris followed when he calculated that below it. So you can see the different departments, what's transferring back in, and then how that totals up between the hospitality and local accommodations. So to go through kind of what Chris did, and if you have questions, he can get into the weeds on it with you. But for the direct cost, he just looked and said what general funded activities are directly going to carry out cultural and tourism related activities. And so he looked at police, public services, community events, road, lighting, parking, transportation, all the kind of things that go into putting on events, cultural events, supporting events throughout the town. And then he looked at indirect cost. that they use to provide services to departments that support cultural and tourism-related activity, including executive, finance, public services, human resources, IT. So if we're putting on an event and staff's having to do it, then technically a portion of me is supervising staff that is supervising, that's involved in it. So we can account for some of that. That's indirect. Direct would be the police being down there actually shutting roads down. That's a direct cost. Indirect is HR having to hire the police and train them and maintain them to make sure they can be down there to do that. That may be 2% of their overall cost, where that direct cost maybe 100% of them being there for that time. And so what he did is he did the total direct and indirect cost for each department under each fund, and that's what calculated the transfer in.
I don't know how you do all that, but.
But like I said, if you want to see the spreadsheet,
what is townwide? That's the only question.
Insurance, street lights, trash, stuff like that.
Just never seen that townwide.
Yeah, it's
That's new, right?
no, it's not new, but it's streetlights, your waste management contract, and things that support the town as well.
Yeah.
Crossing lights or whatever we need to buy. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, all those the light posts downtown, they probably all come out of there. All that kind of stuff. So there's your townwide department. So that gave us that's something new this year. It hadn't been revisited in years. So we wanted to revisit that this year and make sure that what we're actually doing to support a lot of these things are being reflected. And like we talked about, the goal is when we're transferring that in from local accommodations tax to police, when you have events like Mayfest, Arts and Seafood that get accommodations tax support, the cost for covering for the police for that event is now here, and we don't have to grant it to them and then turn around and pay it back. So it just cuts out that step within for these kind of events like that.
I think that makes perfect sense to me.
So we'll get into stormwater next. I think we all know what the stormwater fund's for. It's one of our favorite ones. It protects the water and water resources, the watershed, and makes sure that we control the water as it flows throughout and stays clean. This recommends keeping our stormwater utility fee the same. This just gives you a comparison of those around us. Hilton Head's a little low, Beaufort's a little higher, Hilton Head's higher, just to give you where the fees are throughout the county. So you can see where the funds are generated. Just about 2/3 of it comes from that fee. 16% comes from license and permits. And then for this year, we're transferring in funds from the previous year of about 20%. So you can see stormwater utility fee. This gives you the breakdown of how that works, or the numbers that are associated with the percentages you saw and how that changes. So you can see the stormwater utility fee, where we talked about those new fees. We show like a $37,000 increase. That's actually because of new permit construction, just inspections. It's really not much of it. We didn't really take those fees and count on them for any kind of revenue growth. So we want to just show that reflected in here. And then this shows down where those funds get spent. You can see about a little short of 50% of it actually goes to the operations of the stormwater department, the watershed department, for operating and salaries and benefits. About 1/3 of it goes out to fund capital projects, about 10% out for debt, and then about 10% is transferred into general fund to offset the support for that department. And this gives you the number breakdown of what that looks like. So you can see about 1.5 goes to operating another account, and then about $1 million goes to CIP, about $300 to debt service, and a little over $300 to the general fund.
So our debt service has actually gone down a little bit from last year.
Yeah, because our interest will go down year over year as we make that payment. Supports May River baseline assessment update. That's at $155,000. This is to do a baseline assessment. I think the last one we did was in 2005.
2002.
So it's been about 20 years. So this will give us a good baseline to say, here's what we looked like a little over 20 years ago. Here's where we are now. How are our programs working? You know, what's out there compared to where we were, and do we need to make any changes, or are we doing well? Continues to support our drainage and ditch maintenance that we perform. It supports a sea grant climate change and resilience analysis. This is to kind of take our first look to see how sea level changes are affecting. We know, we have strong suspicions it's affecting septic tanks, but until we actually model it and look at it, this will give us not only where we are now, but how we're looking in the next 10, 20, 30 years, and what may be areas that are going to be impacted in the future, so we can make plans on how to better address it. And then again, it supports our partnership with USC for the water quality and microbial source tracking, where they do the lab analysis for us. We do the sampling, they give us the results. And then it supports our debt payment for our GO bond. So speaking of debt, this takes us to our last fund for tonight, the debt service fund. This is where we account for the accumulation of our payment of interest and principal on our long-term debt obligations. We are limited on what we can bond for our general obligation against our general fund at 8% of our estimated assessed value. So you can see we can bond up to, our debt limit is about it's 26, a little over 26 million. The debt we have that's applicable to the limit for fiscal year 24 is a little over 7.5. So we're only at about 28% of our bonding capacity for our GO bond, which is very healthy.
And that's 5% less than last year.
Yes, sir.
Right.
That, as you can see, that represents our debt limit actually going up because assessed value went up.
Oh, I see why.
But you can also see we have about $400,000 less in payments based on payments that were made and our principal being reduced on our debt. So the amount because that's based on our principal of our debt that's out there. So these are our debts that we carry. We have 2 GO bonds. We have one that we did that's being paid by stormwater utilities, and that's going to support a lot of these sewer projects that we're undertaking. And we also have another one that was used for the law enforcement center back in 2010. And you can see that on the right, it shows the amount of principal and interest that we'll pay for fiscal year 24, which means that the outstanding debt will be reduced by that principal amount that we have. And we have 2 tax increment finance bonds. One we did in December of 2005, January of 2006, where we issued $10 million and $4 million to do Bluffton, the Hampton Parkway, as well as some streetscape and then sewer projects. The one that we issued this current fiscal year is being used for the new Riverside Barn project to support its completion and escalate the schedule for getting that done. So you can see both of those are highlighted in blue for our TIF bonds. And those are set to expire when the TIF district is set to expire. So we did that. We extended the TIF for 10 years to have it out for 10 more years, and the bond will expire when it comes up. This shows you where the funds come for our debt service. As you can see, about 50% come from property taxes. A little bit comes from license and permits, and then stormwater fund transfers in as well as carry our prior year fund balance. So this gives you the breakdown of that and numbers. And then this tells you where it's going. And that transfer out to CIP is where we're putting money into the sewer projects that are in there, as well as money into the park projects and stuff like that that we are holding in there. And this gives you the breakdown for that, so you can see the 931 for the TIF bond, as well as that's the payments. Apologize. So that gives you the breakdown. So you can see the biggest one we have is a TIF bond from 2014, followed by the one 2022, and then our GEO bonds.
The one that's oh no, that's just
a subtotal.
that's good.
All right, so this is the CIP project. So it's funding. You can see we have Buckon Simmonsville Phase 5, Pathway Pedestrian Safety Improvements, Ghost Roads, Boundary Street, Law Enforcement Center Facility, the Buck Walter Master Plan, and then Oscar Fraser Park.
Question on the Buckeye and Somerville Phase 5.
Yes, sir.
Timeline.
Yes, sir. Once we get going, it shouldn't be terribly long. We're working through what the final submittals need to be to Beaufort Jasper for their pre-construction meeting to turn loose the contractor. Our hope is that by late summer, meaning probably mid-July, late July, that Zeke will be out on site. And then it should not be long. It should be before the end of the calendar year.
Zeke is ready to go. We met with him yesterday.
Zeke's put in sewer lines in Bluffton now. Y'all leave Zeke alone.
Zeke is ready to go on all of
He's ready to go on all of them. And
He is ready to go.
Just one question I have, Stephen.
Yes, sir.
Walter Place Multi-County Commerce Park Phase 2.
same thing we talked about earlier. That's the development of our pads. That's the
$2.5 million?
That's where the rest of that is. Yes, sir. It's supposed to go for the construction of all that parking and everything back in there, as well as the horizontal for the pad construction, infrastructure and everything. That's part of that economic development. That's another reason we want to get that one moving forward. Again, we're carrying these funds. We want to get them either spent or moved somewhere, carried forward, addressed. We've been carrying forward for a while now.
Yeah, I guess I just kind of add things up. It seems like we did that last year and the year before last year. And it's like, how much are we really spending? Well, we haven't spent.
On that one, we haven't spent, I don't think we've spent anything out there since I've been here. So I'm ready to, like I said, ready to move it forward one way or the other. All right, so this takes us to our fund balance. This shows you our fiscal year 22, our fiscal year estimate for the end of this fiscal year for 23. So you can see we're looking at the general fund going up slightly, but the hospitality tax is exceeding expenditures right now. So it and local accommodations and all of that looks like it's carrying forward or exceeding our revenue estimates, and it's anticipated to grow. That's where, again, we can have some conversations on the new law with the 15% for the local accommodations fund, how we want to address that. And we'll, now that we know that that's coming, or been approved, we can look at that as we prepare some conversation for next meeting.
I'm confused. Go back to that for a second, please. Why are we at 39 here and last year was 53? Or no, I mean projected 61?
So just to explain a little bit on this slide, so the FY23 estimate is basically saying in a lot of these funds, we have projects that these dollars are for, or expenses that these projects are for, just they haven't been completed. So like the CIP program, a lot of that, there are projects that are out there that are already being planned to be executed. So what FY24 column is saying is if we do everything we say we're going to do for next fiscal year, we'll have spent down those dollars. So that's why it looks like that.
I get it.
Just think of like New Riverside Barn, but if we get it done, then that's $10 million in itself for one project. Same thing with Squire Pope.
Happen in a year? Let me just say that. It's not going to happen in a year.
Your projected number could be 20 off.
Yeah. We won't know until it's just like what happened with Buckon. We projected that to be done last fiscal year. Well, we ran into an issue with the contractor. It took 12 months to get it re-awarded, and here we are. So this is an estimate. If they do everything that they think that they're going to be able to get done, if the schedule runs as it's supposed to be, that's where we would be.
no risk of that happening.
We can always hope and dream, but yes, based on past history, we're not going to, we're probably overestimating. So we also have some fund balance policies that we like to keep. One is our emergency reserve fund, which is 15% of all budgeted expenditures, which is $8.8 million. We have our unassigned reserve fund, which is 35% of all budgeted general fund expenditures, which is 9.3. And then we have our capital asset reserve fund, which is 50% of the total annual depreciation up to the maximum of the most recent 5 years of depreciation. So for fiscal year 24, that is estimated to be about $630,000. So this exceeds our essential levels of fund balance reserve, so we're in a healthy position. And I will say this fund balance policy that y'all adopted last year, Chris actually and Heather were just at the GFOA conference. Chris gave a presentation on it, and we also won one of 3 national awards for this policy that we adopted. So it is a strong, very highly recognized policy that y'all put into place to make sure financially long-term we are in a good position for your residents.
Good job, y'all.
So, few things at the state level that may impact that we're keeping an eye on. Bills and budget items. S-284 was signed by the governor. And as we talked about, that allows up to 15% of your state and local accommodations tax. That number that is there is what 15% of our budget would be for based on the estimates for fiscal year 24 that can go for affordable housing projects. So that's a little short of about $400,000. As we start moving forward, we can look at as a source to address affordable housing in years to come.
That's a lot.
Yes, sir.
Huge help.
It's better than what we had before, no doubt. They were going to allow hospitality tax, but that got taken out. If we could have done 15% of hospitality tax, then that would have been a significant number. The key to remember is right now we're using a lot of the state and local to go to support CIP projects. So this would be potentially a good source for, say, our affordable housing CIP project. But if we start taking away to use for other programs, then it may impact the schedule at which we can accomplish some CIP projects. So it's a balancing act, but it's some things, again, we can talk about as we continue to see our local accommodations and our state accommodations stay at a high level. It gives us some things, it gives us some hope that we can use this for projects or for priorities that we have. Funding requests, y'all know about a lot of these, but we've put in for a lot. But $500,000 Chris got to go towards sewer projects. I think we may have already spent that before we even got it. We did get the $5.29 million from the state. BJWSA actually got that, and we're working. You saw the press release on that. We're working to get the contract finalized and move that forward. There was $60,000 in appropriations for the police department in the state budget, and there were $2 million for the New Riverside Trail in the state budget. We're monitoring that to see whether it gets through now that they're in conference committee. I'm hoping we'll know something by the first of next week. And then there's also $3 million to support the Regional Housing Trust Fund that was in there as well. So we're watching that to see if it comes through. And yes, sir.
Sorry to stop you, but I got to go there. The $500,000 we already got.
Yes, sir.
And the 52 going to Beaufort Jasper, that's done.
That's done.
So where do we start what we're waiting on?
The $60,000 and down.
That hasn't been approved.
That
yet.
hasn't been approved. They were
So the
in the
first
budget,
two are
or they're putting in the
signed.
request. We just don't know whether they're going to be coming or not.
Gotcha.
So the next 3, the 60,000, the 2 million, and 3 million, those are state allocations, and that should be decided within the next,
Week
or so. The 1.3 million, that's a federal, and we won't know that until the end of December, because that's just the federal.
And that's not coming to us. That's coming to
Which one?
the bottom one.
No, that would come to us from the Fed.
Wow.
So Senator Graham put out a request for anybody who had requests for funds that they would like. We looked back at what he had funded within the state previously, and we submitted a couple things that lined up with his priorities and the president's priorities. And one that we put in for was police equipment based on the new radios they're transferring out, body camera, stuff like that. And the way we found out that we made his cut and was actually in his recommended budget was by a news story that showed up in our news feed. We didn't hear it from him. We heard it from the news, and then we reached out and they were like, "Oh yeah, we would have told you eventually." But
Wow.
so
There aren't any funding state level or federal level for affordable housing?
the state level sets money for affordable housing, but it's to go towards like construction projects. It's one of those things. I know Vicky is looking into a couple to look for grants for affordable housing. But at the same time, we're also pushing the Beaufort the Housing Trust Fund for some of these that are going to go towards region-wide construction or programs that they need to be approaching these as well. So we're looking.
Even though I know we contribute to that Regional Housing Trust Fund, that's not something I think we can.
We're definitely not going to depend on them.
Can't depend on
100%, no,
right.
sir.
So we don't. Vicky has a busy job, so who else that looks for grant can help her with that?
We have a person that we contract that helps us find grants, and Vicky's working with them.
All right.
Between Vicky, Felicia, and them, they'll find something. The issue we run into is when you start finding grants for housing renovation or affordable housing, it's the stipulations a lot of times that come along with it. Is it worth putting up with the stipulations for the funds? And that's what we're dealing with 5B. That was one of the reasons, or Buck Island Simmonsville Phase 5, because there were federal grants tied to it. And if we didn't have to wait on them to approve everything we did, we could have expedited this probably 6 months faster.
And I hate to do this, but that's why we're having that problem, because we waited on $300,000 when we had already agreed that the town was going to fund it. So now we put ourselves in the box because we waited on $300,000.
Understood.
All right.
So a couple other bills that may have impacts on the town that we're watching. May not be budgetary, may be budgetary. But one is there's a House bill that's going through. They're trying to push it. It's stuck in committee right now, which would prohibit a municipality from enacting an ordinance that stops the rental of residential dwelling to a short-term guest. Some of the language that can be interpreted to say that we can no longer set regulations around them, which means that we may not be able to say how many you can have, where they can go, what the regulations are about it. We might be able to still collect our fee, but we wouldn't be able to necessarily regulate. Right now, there's a grandfather clause in there that says that if you have something before this is adopted, it may get to stay, but we wouldn't necessarily, if we went back in to change it, we may run into issues down the line. So we're monitoring that. There's been several towns that have gone and spoke, including Mayor Murray from Beaufort, Hilton Head, Mount Pleasant, several others that have gone up and spoke at the committee and trying to make this, let local home rule control what we do with short-term rentals. So we're monitoring that to keep up in case it's going to impact what we've done on short-term rentals.
Well, this is probably not targeting what we're doing. I mean, we're putting regulations on it, as far as making them buy a license.
So
we have rules, but we're not telling them that they can't. They just have to go by the rules.
So it depends on how you read it. Some of it says that you wouldn't be able, some say it would make it so you couldn't prohibit them. Like, in other words, you could say, we're not going to have any short-term rentals in town. But the language is written to say that you can't restrict. And some would argue that whenever you put how many you can have in a location, what you have to do to qualify, stuff like that you're putting restrictions on them. So there's an argument that any restriction on whether it's they can't go, they can't go in this neighborhood, or you can only have so many within this neighborhood, or you can only have one per property, they would say that's a restriction. Depending on how loosely you read the language, that may become illegal. So you would not be able to put any restrictions on them, period.
How would this work with POAs and stuff that already have that in in a covenant that
A POA,
It's not short-term rentals.
well,
people who want a short-term rental within a development.
POA are a little different. This would be more town-wide.
It prohibits a municipality from,
Yeah.
interesting.
The other one is sentencing enhancements for persons who commit certain additional crimes on pre-trial release on bond. So this is for, you get into a situation where somebody may get arrested for domestic violence, high and aggravated. Well, they get out on bond, and while they're out on bond, they go and do domestic violence, high and aggravated again. Well, because they haven't been found guilty of this first one, it's still first offense. So they get back out on bond again. And then they go and they do something. So now they're looking at some restrictions that if you're out on bond and you get caught doing something high and aggravated or something like that again, then it would restrict the bond that you could get and be able to keep you from getting out and continuing down that path. So we were just watching that. We don't know how it may affect our court because we don't do a lot on those kind of charges, but we do issue some bonds. So we'll have to keep an eye on that just to see how it may affect our court operations if it gets passed. So just a couple things in the hopper. They didn't get passed this year, but everything that's in the hopper for this year will be considered next time they go into session in February. So it's still in play. So just a couple things to keep an eye on. So to wrap up, this is our total estimated consolidated budget for fiscal year 23-24. And then where we are in the process, this wraps up Budget Workshop 1, unless there's any additional questions or things that we want to discuss. And then we'll get into Budget Workshop 2 on Tuesday at 5. We will have the Chamber DMO here to talk about what they're going to do. Chris and I will do some research and conversation to come back on some of the items we talked about tonight. And then we'll get into the CIP projects at that point in time.
I know Lisa asked for that, but give them a time limit now. I don't know. We're not going to be here all night listening to the...
You talking the CIP?
No, the chamber.
Oh, Chamber, yeah, I'm sorry, CIP, DMO. Yeah, I get 5 minutes, as I told them.
Okay. All right.
Unless y'all ask them a lot of questions.
All right.
I also sent them what their DMO contract says with like the 8 items and said you need to focus on that. Anything else from tonight or in general that you want us to prepare or have ready to talk about Tuesday?
I don't know if it's appropriate now, but I know it was a conversation that you, Chris, and I had before about looking at possible incentives to food and beverage establishments on who would be using like compostable items, whether it was through some type of thing similar to what ARPA did, where they like present receipts or whatever and get like a comp or something for that. If we could explore ideas on
Using items.
like compostable items, as we talk about like
Takeout
doing
containers,
green
silverware,
things,
cups.
like protecting the environment, the river, like those who are going away from styrofoam usage for like takeouts and stuff like that. What? Why are you laughing, Larry?
Yeah. Figure
You're
that
on
one out.
board?
I'm on board.
That was one of the things that we
can't say
discussed
that I
our
wanna
strategic plan. We talked about green initiatives that didn't necessarily receive a lot of input, a lot of support. So,
Mr. Hamilton, anything else?
I move that we adjourn.
We are adjourned.